Well, I really appreciate you being on. So, just so everyone knows, I met Ryan through a mutual friend where we worked in the hospital and in the ER up at Mission. You said you never worked at Mission in ER. I could have sworn
Yeah.
you did.
No, I was friends with nurses that moved up to Mission.
Okay. It must have been that Kelly meant, or I misunderstood her, that she had a friend that was ER and then he went to the ICU and then she
Yep.
went to the ICU. Is this the friend that we're
Yep.
talking about? Okay.
Exactly.
And so I thought that was you, but it wasn't. So it was a friend of
No.
a friend.
Yeah. And then that's Brad. And so he was kind of our superstar tech in my ER. Went back
Okay.
to nursing school. We remained friends. And then when we started Float, this new thing that we're doing, he was one of the first nurses to sign up in Orange
Okay.
County.
Oh,
And so he's kind of been the magnet to get more nurses in that area because he's like,
I'm
this is
telling
great,
you,
you got to do this too.
yeah. Well, I'm telling you, word of mouth, if you have someone who can vouch for someone else, and it's not the references they listed on their sheet, that's their mom and grandma or something, like that. Someone who actually knows them, actually knows their work ethic, has actually worked with them, and that's always, it's kind of unprovoked. They're like, oh, you should talk to my friend. So I think that's always a
100%.
positive.
That's like it works both ways for us, and like I'll explain more I'm sure
Yeah.
about what we
So,
do, but it's
yeah.
like the referral engine that works both ways where we have like I can trust that someone that Brad refers is going to be an excellent nurse, and then similarly if Brad's telling them like this is a great thing, you should get in on this, then they're equally as excited.
Yes. Okay. So everyone knows this is Ryan. He owns a home IV infusion company. It's not the IV hydration post night of partying kind of company. It's something else. But before we get there, tell us how you start. Where are you from? Where are you at now? Where are you from?
Oh, like all the way back to the beginning.
Yeah, I mean, we don't have to go through everything,
Yeah.
but just so people know where you're
I live
located.
down the road from the hospital I was born in, which is true. I
Oh,
grew up in North County, San Diego. I'm
yeah.
back there now. Undergrad, I went to Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, got a biology degree. Started doing research. Was on my way to like a master's PhD program, studying white sharks and tuna, which was like kind of the
Oh,
dream job for me at that point. But the internships that I was doing for that didn't pay really anything.
yeah.
So to pay the bills, I had been in healthcare. I had my EMT. I became a tech on an ALS ambulance service
Okay.
for the whole region in Central California. So it would respond to the 911 calls and everything. And then I was also working as a tech in an ER. So I was kind of contrasting the the lab work, which was great. Like on the research side, it was probably the coolest thing that you could do in science.
Yeah.
But it paled in comparison to how exciting it was to like respond to the 911 calls and work in the ER. So that's what kind of tipped me to go into healthcare. And due to some urging from a really wonderful, my director at that small little ER, Georgette, was like very gently encouraging that nursing was the way I should go.
Yeah.
And I applied, got into University of Virginia, so moved there for a couple years, and
Right.
then my now wife and I could have gone anywhere, and we decided, why would you not come back to San Diego? So we moved back to San Diego, and
Right.
that's where I
So
started my nursing career.
the program at Virginia, was that a second degree accelerated program? Okay.
Yeah, exactly. So it was like 24 straight months of the actual. It was wonderful. It was all one-on-one preceptorships throughout. So really like thrown into the deep end. Since I had like already at that point 10 years in healthcare, it made a lot of sense for me, but it was very fast paced. I learned a lot really quickly from some really wonderful nurses as I went to like each unit. So that was really cool. I was basically a part-time nurse in each unit throughout the whole curriculum, which was awesome.
Yeah, I'm so glad that they have these second degree programs because I did the same thing. I went to Texas Tech, got a degree in Spanish. I was going to major in biology because I wanted to go to medical school, but I ended up abandoning that idea, majored in Spanish. I was going to be a teacher. And actually, fun fact, since you were a research biology, I worked as a molecular biology research assistant when I was an undergrad. And
Mm-hmm.
my master student, she was working on developing a blood test that would tell you the sex of emus.
That's so cool.
And
It's weird that you
apparently
have
it's
to check their
difficult to
blood.
tell.
There's not an easier way to tell.
Exactly. There was not an easier way to tell, so they wanted to develop this, and so we did tons of sequencing DNA. She had Cosmin libraries. I was spinning down um, DNA, doing Western blots, that whole thing.
Mhm.
So someone who knows what I'm talking
Oh
about.
yeah, totally. And it's like so interesting, which is like why nursing ended up being this perfect pairing, because the science is like
Yeah,
melded with the actual practical application of it in
right.
nursing. So it's like it's so cool to have that background and understand a lot, like, how do monoclonal antibodies work for COVID? Like I kind of have the background to understand it pretty easily. Like I can read the scientific literature to a degree.
Yeah, I think that's so cool because I think um, the public and other nurses view nurses being just this one way. And that's just not true. It's so vast. We come from all sorts of areas and areas of interest, really. Not everyone's Florence Nightingale, and that's okay. You can
Totally.
be, but you don't have to be. There's a place for you. So, yeah, I went to Georgetown later in life, but it was a second degree
Oh,
program.
awesome.
I think
Hmm.
ours was 16 months. So I was just across the state from you.
Totally.
And anyway, okay, so you come back to San Diego. I imagine you were in the ER with all your EMT
Yeah,
experience,
I was, happy to take any new grad position that I could land.
right?
A little desperate too, of course.
Right.
So had a couple, opportunities, interviews, but I was lucky enough to get a shadow visit at one of UCSD's ERs with
Mhm.
a nurse that actually ended up being an assistant manager to me,
Okay.
which was cool, down the line. And then the very next day, I had an interview with their sister ER in La Jolla, so at UCSD La Jolla. So due to like the one-on-one preceptorships I had in my emergency response experience, and kind of seeing the day before how their ER ran, I just kind of understood that it was like it would be a really good fit. And I was lucky enough to get that job. They hadn't had a new grad in years
Yeah.
at that point, and I was hired as the one. So it was like a very fortuitous thing.
Yeah.
And then for so many other reasons, it just became, I can't imagine what my career would have been like if I hadn't been so lucky to start there. Like mainly because of the preceptors, and then also like the slightly older than me nurses that were there that
Yeah.
were just so supportive as I was completely green, like didn't know how to be a nurse. In like a real meaningful way, like
Right.
just read some books and done some clinical, and they like over the years just helped make me into like a much better nurse, a much better like advocate for patients, a much more technically proficient nurse. There was just like the right amount of pressure to make sure that I became, a nurse worthy of being in the ER.
Yeah. I actually, so the way that it worked at Georgetown, I was part of this scholarship program. And that scholarship meant that you were required to work for Washington Hospital Center for 3 years. But it was a guaranteed job after nursing
Mm-hmm.
school. And you're like, okay, sweet. Well, I did my senior practicum or whatever, the last I did it
Mm-hmm.
in the ER. So
Mm-hmm.
they took me as a new grad in the ER. And someone I was interviewing yesterday, he actually works for the Padres. He did the same program. I didn't know this when I talked to him. He did the same program. He was in the ER. We were kind of like overlapping. We didn't even know each other. We
Oh, that's
were
crazy.
sort of lamenting on how sick the patients were over there.
Mm-hmm.
But when I moved to California, I was glad I had that experience because at the time I heard it was really difficult to get a job in California as a new grad. And
Mm-hmm.
so I'm like, oh, sweet, I've got these 3 years. So what year did you come back and get
Uh,
the?
in 2011.
Oh, okay. I graduated in 2011 as well.
Cool.
But I stayed in DC and then I moved to
Hmm.
California in 2014.
And then at
So
that point, you had 3 years of experience, so everyone wanted you.
I guess I did the travel thing first because you're like, oh, I'm going to move to a new state. Well, I'll just be a traveler for a year and get the
Hmm.
tax free benefit. But so yeah, was it hard to find a job? They took you
Oh
in.
yeah,
Okay.
Yeah, it was very difficult. Like there was just it was kind of thrown out there, didn't have as many resources. The same, I wasn't required, obviously, to stay at University of Virginia Health System,
Okay. Hmm.
but I had done my practicum for my program in the ER, and I had had a clinical rotation in there as well. So they knew me really well, like the nurses, but also the management. So they would have hired me had I stayed there. So I was kind of like, leaving the bird in the hand to go back to California.
Yeah.
So I was just so lucky. Like I don't know how the stars aligned,
Yeah.
but they did. So it was really cool.
That's awesome. So that was 2011. Okay. What then? How long did you stay there? Or are you
I
still there?
stayed I stayed there forever. No, stayed there for into 10 years there. But the department itself, when I got hired, had just moved physically like over through the building from being this like, small little ER. It was 8 to 10 beds. To literally like I got hired and they were just opening their new 24 bed side of like a modern ER. And then while I was there, it grew to 30 something, like 32 beds, and then later 53. So I very much like kind of felt like kind of the goldfish. Like I kind of the pond grew bigger and I got to grow along with it. So a lot of my like development as a nurse was accelerated because I was just kind of the our patient population was increasingly getting sicker and the volume was getting bigger. They're huge oncology population, so
Mhm.
there was just a lot of very sick people increasingly coming in, and then the volume continued to grow over those years. And then professionally, I was kind of quickly, because I was the only new grad, like kind of pulled into doing a lot of projects. And I liked those, like kind of process improvement things, particularly with resuscitation and improving, like reducing mortality of patients and improving outcomes, reducing costs, like those type of projects, but
Mhm.
particularly with resuscitation. So I got pulled into the hospital wide Code Blue committee pretty early.
Oh, wow.
And that was very awesome. Like I just loved it. I kind of got to live vicariously through the super smart, super cool ICU nurses that were also a part of it.
Yeah.
And started teaching resuscitation classes for the whole health system. UCSD has their own home baked, like I would argue, way more effective than American Heart Association
Yeah.
resuscitation program.
Yeah.
So I got deep into that and then other projects. And then that involvement in all of those projects made me kind of the reluctant only candidate to become the educator for the department when the former educator retired. So that was an
Reluctant. So were
interesting.
you voluntold?
Yes, 100%. I think like times three before I was like, fine, I'll do it, but just for a little bit. And that little bit turned into 3 years, which also encapsulated COVID. So that
Okay.
was just a crazy time, obviously, for any nurse anywhere, but particularly being in the ER, like from where my role was at that time, like the a lot of the fears and uncertainty. I kind of felt like it was my role's job to get a lot of clarity around those. So again, it was like diving into the scientific literature that was kind of coming up, pre-publications every day to say like, how can we develop the process to intubate like without getting ourselves infected and those type of things.
Yeah.
So that was like very interesting and taxing too, I'm sure mentally. And then kind of rode that through until late 2021, late 2020. And then I wanted to start this thing that I do now, float. But this idea was kind of like pressing on me enough that I thought it was time to do it. So I took a part time job, left the ER, went across the hall to our heart failure clinic,
Okay.
did that on a part time basis so that I could take more home visits and kind of have a little bit, I thought, a little better work life balance. It just kind of changed the work life, I think.
As an
And
entrepreneur, you increased.
yeah, yeah, but in a way I control. So I
Sure.
100% like think it was the right decision.
Yeah.
Um, but so I did that heart failure coordinator role for a year, and then float was doing well enough that it was kind of worth it to take the risk of leaving the hospital and the security there to just try. And so
Mhm.
my wife and I kind of said, okay, we'll give it 4 months and kind of see where we're at and reevaluate.
Yeah.
And then that's what we did, and that was a year and a week ago.
Wow.
Mhm.
So, back up, how did you even get this idea to start Float?
Yeah, we've talked a little bit, Erica, but I didn't tell you this. So,
Yep.
my my dad is a patient that has a chronic condition that has to be
Mhm.
treated by medicine through an IV. So he has uh, was born with an immune disorder, and by the time he was in his 20s, it was severe enough that he was getting a pneumonia that required hospitalization once or twice a year.
Okay.
And he was like otherwise a robust guy. He was in construction in on roofs and stuff, and then he'd get like saddled with this like big infection, and then it would just take him down. And he almost died a couple times, like before I was even a twinkle in his eye. So back in his 20s, and then sometime during that, like in the 80s, early 80s, he started to receive plasmapheresis to kind of supplement his
Mhm.
immune disorder, or to like his immune components. And I don't know a ton of the details here because he's not a medical person, so he doesn't know them.
Yeah.
But it would basically require him to go down 30 miles down to the closest hospital with a family member. They would donate, they would spin it down, they would give it to him,
Oh,
and he
wow.
had to do that like once every 2 months. In the 90s, there was a kind of a manufacturer that created immune globulins that could be given. So he
Mm.
started to be able to get those instead, but same thing, he'd have to take the day off work to do it. And then the home infusion idea kind of like came out around that time. At least he started being able to get offered home infusion, so he
Okay.
could have a nurse actually come to him.
Mhm.
It failed like 90% of the time. So he would set up the visit with the nurse. The nurse might not show up. If they did show up, they were usually a home health nurse. So they didn't have the technical skills. So they would poke him. They had like usually like their a quote maximum would be 6 pokes. So they poke him like 6 times. And then they'd have to call in somebody else, reschedule him for another day. That nurse might come, poke him 6 times, not get a line. So it was just kind of like very untrustworthy
Yeah.
experience for him, and so he
Yeah.
would still get sick all the time because he wouldn't get the treatment he needed. When I became a nurse and moved back, I just became his nurse. So I said, don't go into the infusion center, don't have these other nurses come, I'll just do it.
Yeah.
I'm a new nurse, but I'm getting pretty good at IVs. I'm better than these people.
It
And
can't be
so
worse than 6 sticks.
yeah, exactly. So it was great practice for me as a new grad.
Your dad.
Um, yeah, he's a very supportive father for sure.
I love
Um, but it worked out great. So yeah, and I could always get him in one stick, and we'd have dinner together, and it was just kind of this thing. But the pharmacies that would send him the meds, they were kind of asking like, do you have would you want to take other nurses? So I started talking to another company that kind of supported these home nurses, and they told me a bunch and were kind of like, you should just start your own thing. That this is kind of how we did it. You could do the same. They were both nurses. They were older. They were in their 60s at this time. Like this was 6 or 7 years ago. And they were in Northern California, and they were like, just
Okay.
start your own thing. You could do it. Do it just the way we did. They kind of like laid out the playbook for it. And I kind of put a pin in that idea for 5 years or so.
Yeah.
Had kids and was busy, being thrown into that educator role. But it
Yeah.
was just kind of brewing in the back of my head. And I had this once every 2 weeks reminder because I'd go over to my dad's and I'd be doing this, for free. And but because he was my dad, but kind
Yeah.
of being like, this could be like a great thing. It was a cool way to like use my nursing skills outside of the hospital. And it obviously made like my dad's quality of life better.
Yeah.
So I was like, there must be more patients like this. I know there are, but
Mhm.
kind of just kept it. And then in the back of my head, and then at the same time, kind of unbeknownst to me, my sister-in-law, who's not a nurse, but had done a lot in operations and worked with some startups, like new companies and stuff before. One of her best friends that had is more of a technical person. She's like a coder.
Mhm.
They were talking about like starting something together. Like, what should our idea be? We can use, like your operations experience, your startup experience, and then her friend's technical experience. Like, what could we do together? And Christy, my sister-in-law, shared my idea because she was watching me with my dad, and hearing me talk about like how this should be a thing. So they kind of powwowed separately, unbeknownst to me, and said like, that is a good idea. Let's see if we can talk to Ryan more about this. So we spent kind of 6 months, once a week meeting, kind of figuring out how we would do this, what it would look like, where we would get patients, where we would get nurses, how the system kind of worked.
Mhm.
And then that was in early, I'm gonna get all my dates wrong, early 2021, through mid 2021.
Okay.
And then in August of 2021 we decided to just do it. So we were like, cool, this is worth trying. Formed the company, started staffing our first visits, and it was very quickly more than like me and the couple of other nurses that we had locally could do. So it just kept growing. We applied to a program that helps new businesses kind of get up and running, a startup accelerator program. It's called Y-Combinator, and they're kind of notorious for being the place where Airbnb was born, and DoorDash, and Stripe, like a lot of these companies that have kind of taken a small idea and made it like a new thing.
Right.
So we applied to that, and I forget what the numbers are, but it's something like 0.5% of people who apply get interviews, and we got an interview.
Right.
And then only some fraction of the people that interview get into the program. And so we said, if we get in, we're going to all move in together somewhere and just during the program and be heads down and work on it.
Yeah.
And after the interview, we got in. So
Wow.
we each have 2 kids and spouses, and we left them for 3.5 months and moved up to San Francisco for the program.
Oh,
So
wow.
that was like the big catalyst for like actually launching the business in like a really meaningful way.
So what does this program do for you? Like, what does that mean?
Yeah, like I know that a lot of your listeners are like kind of the entrepreneurial bent. So the thing that's cool about it is that the people who run the program are very experienced themselves in running businesses. Not in nursing, not in healthcare for sure. More of a technical slant to what they focus on, but they also just have like the business experience and the business savvy to kind of understand how you should focus. So a little bit of it is just the pressure cooker, the time constraint of you're in this program for 3.5 months. It's rare to get in, so take advantage of it.
Right.
And then the other thing that they do that's really huge is that since you're in a group of other companies that are doing the same thing as you, they're kind of at a similar stage, but in totally different sectors.
Mhm.
You have all these reference points. So I kind of liken it to going back to nursing school, like in an accelerated program, had all of these people that became like my friends in nursing school that had
Yeah.
come from anthropology backgrounds or been historians or had done things in science or never touched a patient before. They had all these backgrounds, but we're going through the same thing. Like you have
Mhm.
a military background, I'm sure it's kind of like the
Yeah.
like survive together through boot camp. It's like that type of a rally,
Yeah.
where everyone is kind of, we could look across the aisle and say, there's this company that's working on helping wood manufacturers connect with customers with certain orders. That's really similar to us helping nurses connect with these home visits. How did they solve this problem? Well, we could do that too. And then we can share like our playbook with them. So I'd say that was kind of like the biggest thing about being in a group for a focused amount of time. And then the last thing is that because it's a very well known program, at the end of the program, there are a lot of eyes on the current batch of companies to say who is worth investing in.
Mm.
So there are people who will reach out based on like what you've done up to that point, and they might be able to be what are called angel investors,
Right.
or venture capital firms can invest in you and say like, hey, you know what are you doing, why is it working, and can I buy a part of the company to help you grow more. So that's like the third thing that was really fortuitous about getting into that program for sure.
That would make me I've always thought about this. If I needed, a cash infusion. If I needed investors and I had to go and I had to pitch myself, I'm a bootstrapper, Ryan, because when you give up,
Totally.
when you take their money, you give up a little control, unless
Hmm.
they're, silent. So that just that idea just makes me nervous. Did it make you nervous at all, or you're like, no, I'm good, I got it?
Totally. I think it's exactly like you have to make that decision
Mm,
really early on,
yeah,
because you either, for us, like the three of us founding this company, we
yeah,
kind of had to decide, is this a thing we can bootstrap? Because if we
right,
can, let's do that. Let's
yeah,
maintain 100% of the control. Um, but if growing faster would help us deliver like on our vision,
yeah,
it, when otherwise we might not be able to, like if bootstrapping is just never going to help us like make this thing what we think it can become, then we're going to have to take on outside investment and give up a little bit of ownership.
right,
And that is this whole other beast. So I think you kind of have to decide, like, is this my business, or is this going to like be potentially a high growth startup?
mm,
And if you want to chase that other thing, the odds of failure are way higher. Like what the way we went about it, we're much more likely to fail because we're trying to do a lot really quickly,
mm,
and our investors are going to like hold us to the fact that we need to deliver on that vision.
right,
Um, but for us, we thought that the opportunity of like actually just changing the way that healthcare is delivered in the US, like throughout the whole country, in a really meaningful way. Because when we send a nurse to a patient's home, it's obviously better. Like I said, like for my dad, it's better for him if he doesn't have to go to the infusion center, take a day off work. I could just drop a line in him, get his meds going. He could hop on a Zoom. Like he was working from home 12 years ago, like before it was even a thing. And
before
so
the
he could,
pandemic.
yeah, 100%. And so that was huge for him. Like he didn't have to retire early. He just retired this year. And so he designed utilities. Like he was very like respected in his field. That was like a huge part of who he was. He was able to do that without, taking a day off work every 2 weeks. Huge for
Right,
him. And he wasn't sitting in like a infusion center with a bunch of other sick people, so he wasn't getting sick anymore. So that was huge. But then for the nurses, when we do this, like it's a big opportunity for them to kind of relieve their burnout. So
yeah,
most of our nurses, they work in the hospital still. They have their 3 12-hour shifts, but on their days off, they aren't going back in to pick up OT. They're picking up these visits, and they can still like have the extra money to pay for their kids' college or buy a new refrigerator or go on a vacation or whatever. Like those things that we do to when we pick up an extra shift, they can
yeah,
still like satiate that. We had a nurse just this past year pay for his wedding, and it's the most beautiful thing in the whole world. Like you watch the video and like literally eyes get teary. But he paid for that like with his float gig.
yeah,
Um, so that's huge. And then lastly, it just makes the actual healthcare delivery way more efficient, because these patients aren't clogging up the ERs. They aren't clogging up the hospital by taking up a bed to get their routine medications, and they aren't getting their symptoms aren't turning into large enough symptoms. So if we have a patient that was going to have 10 migraines a year, if they can get this migraine infusion once every 8 weeks and never have a migraine, never have to go to the ER for opioids, that's one less patient getting opioids in this country, and it's one less patient going into the ER 2 to 3 times a year. So anyway, very excited to like deliver on that vision, which was the main reason we said like this is something that has to take on investors.
well, and I would have to imagine, I don't know how you would, maybe you've already done this, somehow get insurance companies to buy into it. Maybe you don't need them to buy into it, but it's either, if it's an ER visit versus a home infusion nurse visit, let me tell you,
Mm-hmm.
you go to the ER, you're going to get labs.
Mm-hmm.
You might get a chest x-ray.
Mm-hmm.
You'll see a provider and some medication. You're in an
Probably
EKG
get
or
a
report.
CT. Everybody gets a
Right?
CT nowadays. Yeah,
Minimum 7
exactly.
grand. Minimum
Yeah,
7 grand for that
totally,
ER visit that you sat there for 6 hours and it's a migraine. They're not gonna fix it in the ER, they're just gonna do your symptoms.
totally.
So, if you can, I mean, I don't know how much they reimburse for home infusion, and that's fine, I don't need to know, but it has to be cheaper than $10,000.
Yeah, exactly. It's roughly 10 to 12 times cheaper for the patient to get treated in this way
Yeah.
just when you think about receiving the medicine, much
Mhm.
less when you talk about, okay, but what about all the sequelae of like hospital acquired infections when the patient goes in for an infusion, and all the downstream effects. So it brings a ton of efficiency to healthcare. That yes, I'm sure the insurance companies are, I know that the insurance companies are more than happy to shift more care this way
Yeah.
because it just makes more sense.
It does make more sense. And what I think it's so great because this interview is kind of twofold. It's one about nurses maybe who want to start a business, but two, nurses who have no interest in starting a business, but maybe they want to pivot. Maybe they don't want to pick up an extra shift, but I want to get some extra income. What are my options? Voila, float.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that is the big thing, is that like, because, and we kind of like skipped over this, but there was this point where I was like, I want to do more of this, and other nurses do too.
Yeah.
And so that, but there wasn't an avenue. Like I wasn't going to go, I could go pick up a per diem job at a different hospital, or I could go work in a clinic per diem, or something like that. But there wasn't something that I could just like fit in, just like an extra shift fits in like into my life. And like I said, I have two small kids. So
Yeah.
it was hard. Like my wife works full time. It was hard to pick up an extra shift. Whereas this, like most of these visits, they're 2 to 4 hours long. So if I see a patient, I can do it while my kids are at school, if they aren't stuck home testing positive for COVID, like they are today. But but normally I can just do that while my wife is at work, while the kids are at school. I can pick up one of these visits, and you can go grocery shopping afterwards, or go surfing or mountain biking after. It's so, the flexibility is huge, and then the hourly rate is you know oftentimes as much as twice as much as you would make per hour in the hospital. So it just makes a ton of sense. Like your time is really valued, your skills are really valued, and then the patients absolutely love you because you're coming to them, like they aren't having to go in, and you're giving them the medicine they need to stay healthy. So they aren't going to have their gout flare, they aren't going to have their symptoms of arthritis, they aren't going to get sick because you're supplementing their immune system with the meds that they need, or they aren't going to get the migraines.
Right. So, what does it look like for your nurses? Say a nurse, well, we'll back up. If you have a nurse that applies and you're considering hiring them, what are you looking for in their qualifications?
Yeah, we've learned a lot about like what makes a good float nurse. And so sometimes, usually, if you're a great nurse anywhere, you're going to be a great float nurse.
Yeah.
But sometimes we'll have people that like really find their calling in doing this type of
Hmm.
thing. And so those people tend to be people that come from a hospital background. Typically, it's ER, ICU, or infusion center, but like infusion center in a health system. So they're used to like the patients coming into them. And then typically it's someone with at least 3 to 5 years of experience, because they have the technical skills, and then also just like the clinical expertise. Like they might not be have these specific medicines, or more of home infusion medicine, so maybe they haven't like given this specific medicine for gout before, but they understand the mechanism, and then they also understand the health system, so they can help the patients when they're there kind of navigate the rest of their health lives. So they can use their clinical judgment to say like, yeah, your blood pressure is within range, but it's higher than it was last time. Like, let's talk to your cardiologist, like let's talk to them. And so they actually like improve the overall health of these patients. And then that's super meaningful for the nurse because they can see that they're affecting change. um,
Right.
so yeah, usually like that's what we're looking for, is that background that comes from the hospital. And then on top of that, and then this is probably the reason why nurses tend to really thrive in this environment, is that you do have to be a little bit of a cowboy or a cowgirl, because you're out there alone. Like if I go to a patient's house, I don't have another nurse, I don't have a doctor backing me up or anything. I have an adverse reaction kit. I have the protocols, that I would do. But it feels much more akin to like what my life felt like when I ran on an ambulance, where you're kind of like, okay, if something were to happen, what would I do? And you're kind of like foreplanning. So
Yeah.
I think it takes someone who has, that's why the experience helps a ton, but also, and the technical skills help a ton. But you have to kind of be able to think like, what if? And then that brings me like a lot of security. So like, if the patient has a headache, then I'll, give some Tylenol. If they start having an anaphylactic reaction, I've got this EpiPen here, I've got some Benadryl IV, I've got my line, it's great. I'm going to call 911, the closest hospital is right over there, and, whatever. So it kind of like takes someone with enough confidence in their nursing skills and experience that those what ifs aren't, stopping them from wanting to do it. Because in reality, the rate of an adverse reaction in the home setting is like, teeny tiny, but it's you. So you have to be confident enough to be like, if that happens, I'll just activate EMS and give the meds that I have, and it'll be a chaotic 8 minutes while I wait for the ambulance, but I got this. Yeah, exactly.
So do you have set protocols for reactions, like it's given by the pharmacy or whomever, like a
Yep.
standing orders, I guess?
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
So the physician that prescribes the meds will order like the adverse reaction standing orders, and there'll be other things like for minimal, aberrancies in blood pressure. They might have PRN meds that you would give, that are all part of what the pharmacy sends. And for like anyone who's like, this sounds cool, I want to try this. How does it work? A little like a next layer deep. Is that I just show up with stuff to assess the patient.
Mm.
So I have like my blood pressure cuff, my thermometer, stethoscope. That's all I need. I bring a pulse ox too, just for heart rate. But otherwise, everything else is shipped to the patient's house. So they receive from the pharmacy the meds, the IV
Okay.
start kit, all the supplies, the pump if there's a pump, IV pull if there's an IV pull needed. And since these patients, almost all of them, like over 90% of them, are being treated for chronic conditions, they're seen on a regular basis. They just
Mhm.
keep all this stuff at home. So like they'll
Okay.
usually have a bin that they keep in a closet. You show up, you pull it out, and then they get their fresh delivery of their meds, and then you're just kind of there. You take vitals, make sure it's safe for them, like are they stable enough to get this treatment at home, give them the meds, monitor them, taking vitals and monitoring them throughout. Then you DC everything, pack it all away back in that box, and then they get their next shipment in whenever it's due in a couple weeks.
Okay, that was my question. I didn't know if the nurse went to the pharmacy to pick up the meds, but you're saying they're shipped to the house. You just show
Right.
up with your kit of blood pressure, pulse ox if you want it, thermometer probe stuff.
Yeah, I have like a little bag that stays under the passenger seat of my truck, and I keep a extra pair of scrubs in there and some work shoes. And then if a little message comes through on the phone that there's a visit in Vista tomorrow or today, then I can just be like, oh yeah, cool, I'll take that one.
So how describe how that works? So a nurse, they have their 3 to 5 years experience. They've been in the ER or RIC or infusion center. They apply to you. You say yes. You get them plugged in. Then what?
Yeah, after they've gone through the onboarding process, and like been able to shadow a visit or attend a demo or
Okay.
anything like that, depending on their experience, have they done these type of visits before, which almost all of them have not. Once they're onboarded and they're plugged in, they're actually plugged into our app, and based on where they're willing to travel, they'll get notified of visits. So we'll get a request for a patient, to be seen in, whatever city in Sacramento, and it could be this evening, like if they're just getting discharged. So some of the patients we'll see will be like post acute. So maybe they just had surgery today and they need a hydration visit, or maybe they just got discharged from the ER and they need antibiotics for a couple days. So that's like another big way that we reduce like the impaction on the ER is like just send that patient home, send the nurse to them. They don't need to sit in the ER get admitted for antibiotics.
Right.
So maybe it's for today, or maybe it's for a week from now. So we'll get that notification through our app on the phone, and then I can click accept or decline, or apply or decline, kind of saying like, yes, I want that one. And so if it's one that works for me and my schedule and I want it, I kind of apply, raise my hand, like I'll take that.
Mm-hmm.
Then we coordinate with the patient and the pharmacy to make sure that the time that works for our nurse works for the patient and for delivery of the meds.
Okay.
And then assuming it does, which it usually does, that's it. It's my patient. We'll get all the orders sent so I can review them before, and then I'll go to the visit and then do the visit. Like I said before, just kind of make sure that the patient's stable throughout, and then that's it.
Okay. I
Yeah.
love that. So basically, and so the nurse gets a text saying, "Hey, this has come up. Do you want
Hmm.
it?" And they say
Yeah.
yes or no. And then
Yeah.
this follow on of events happen if they say yes.
Yeah. So when a text comes through, I'll see, I muted my phone so I can't look at an actual example, but I'm sure some have come through while we're talking. But it would say like the medication, the location, the
Okay.
proposed date and time. And usually there's a flexible window because the patients are like, you're coming to me. I'll, I can move things around a little
Yeah.
bit. And then what the pay rate is. So that's
Right.
specific on the medication in the pharmacy. So you kind of know like, oh, it's going to be about a 2 hour visit for $250 or so, like that. I'll do that, or for $300 for 2 hours, 100% I'm in. So you can kind of make that decision there.
I love this. Ryan, when Kelly told me about this, one, like I said before, I was excited for two reasons. One, as a side gig, possibly, well, for nurses or myself, truth be told. But then two, I'm like, I love entrepreneurship. I think it is so cool when someone has an idea and then they're like, let's see how I can do this. And then you brainstorm and it's really difficult and there's multiple headwinds and obstacles, but you figure it out. And I think it was you that, yeah, it was you that I was talking about. Nurses make great entrepreneurs because they're the ones you're going to go to. Hey, this problem, I know it's not in your quote unquote job description, but I kind of just need you to figure it out. And they figure it out. And that's what
Totally.
entrepreneurship is about.
Yeah, exactly. Like, what is a nurse taught from Nursing 101 is to like assess the situation and then intervene and then reassess and then intervene again. And like that is business in a nutshell. And to that point, like we have our nurses that are taking the jobs, but we also, now that we've grown, have people working like for us to help us do this. So it's not just me and my two co-founders. And almost all of them are nurses or have a healthcare background,
Wow.
because of that idea, because they can think that way. They can take ownership of the problem and then just solve it. So that's the other cool thing, is that like not only are we like helping nurses to have like an alternative to burnout, but we're actually like
Right.
giving nurses like jobs too, with us, like we're working with them. And so yeah,
Awesome. So what
totally
kind of
agree.
positions do you have that nurses are doing? Not the home infusion, but the other.
Yeah, it's a lot. It's informatics because we
Okay.
have our app, and so they can work with the tech people. And so several of our nurses that work internally for us started as flow nurses, and then just kind of got more involved. So they do that. They also do like a lot of the clinical operations support. So like answering the calls, answering the requests, answering calls from nurses, answering requests, talking to patients, and just kind of coordinating all of that care, is another big thing that we use nurses for. But really any of it, if it doesn't matter, like even if you weren't doing anything healthcare related, because you have that nursing lens that you can apply to everything, it just makes like the best problem solvers. Like it's remarkable.
Yeah. Wow. I think
Like you think about it, like who runs a hospital really? It's all nurses.
yes.
And so it's that same thing. A hospital's a giant business and it's run by nurses at like every level. So it's
Yes.
that same type of idea.
I absolutely love that. So if you have a nurse that they want to start something, we won't make it specific because there's a million things you can do. What would be your tips or best advice for a nurse who wants to start a business?
Totally. I think it is to just do it, like to take the first
Mhm.
step. I think that like for me, that was kind of the hesitation point where, and like I could say like I had kids and I was, had this other role and like whatever. But what actually like was the tipping point was just me to start doing it.
Yeah.
And like that kind of took the hand to be forced, like with my two co-founders, where there were like we had this reason to do it. Um, but you're gonna be wrong about like all of your assumptions, whatever you think. Like you're gonna have not enough confidence in yourself, you're gonna over assume certain things, you're gonna think that your solution is the way to do it, like your idea is the best idea, like your idea probably sucks, but the fact that you want to solve the problem is the path you should follow. So just like lean into the problem, try to solve it. You'll fail and then try again, like reassess, intervene again, reassess, intervene. I think that is just like the biggest thing. I like separately, kind of alongside my nursing work, I had other things that I kind of started. I had a coffee company that like
Oh,
did, yeah, we like roasted coffee and did local sales. Delivered by bike was kind of like our gimmick, but we had like a subscription model for local coffee subscriptions, and that was the same kind of thing. Like it just had to like start doing it, and then it grew incrementally over time. And
do you
there's
still
been like
have
a
it?
couple other things. No, I sold out my share of that like, oh, I don't
Okay.
even know, like 5 years ago now. Like
Okay.
basically when I became the educator,
Yeah.
it was I didn't want to own a coffee shop. It was great. I learned a ton about like marketing and
Yeah.
just so much about how like a business might work.
Yeah.
But even that, like that technically was a failure, but I learned so much that I just like, translated it to the next thing. So just like, just do it. Like you, like just start the podcast, like just
Yeah.
do the thing, whatever it is, and you'll
Yeah.
get better by doing it.
Yes. I heard, what was it? A couple of things that I heard is one, do it messy. Everyone's trying to, well, it has to be perfect because that's what you see, right? You see online in articles and, the Fortune 500 magazines, and everything looks glossy and perfect. And these people just know things, and business is for other people. No,
Mm-hmm.
it is for you. You can do it. It's going to be messy. It's not going to be perfect. You're going to be wrong. You're going to make some mistakes. And ta da, you're an entrepreneur. Welcome.
Totally.
This is
Yeah.
it.
100%. We
Yeah.
like we have a couple of values at Float and like internally, and like one of them that we embrace is like more or less be the adult. And that is kind of saying that like there are no adults, like no one's going to hold your hand, no one's going to tell you how to do this. You have to be the one to do it. So there's like a degree of responsibility and ownership. But
Yep.
then with that responsibility, it also means that like you're going to help find the solution. So like I kind of look at it as like raising kids. Like you're going to like you can't just prescribe to them this is how you walk. Like you're going to kind of let them stumble, and like that's what I look at. Like each project that we do, the business at large is kind of like guiding towards what you want, but you aren't going to just snap your fingers and be there.
Yeah. I love that the toddler, or when they're learning to walk, they fall, they cry, they might hit their head on the corner of the coffee table. There's stitches, there's blood, there's weeping and gnashing of teeth. But guess what? They get back up and they keep walking,
Yeah.
and it's
and
fine.
and when things do derail and they're like they hit their head on the coffee table, like you're the adult. Like you can't just wave your hands and hope someone else takes care of it. Like you
Right.
grab them, you clean them up, you assess, do they need to go get stitches, or are they going to be okay with a butterfly bandage or whatever. And like
Right.
that's the business in a nutshell. That's running it in a nutshell. Is just kind of like things are going to happen. It's your responsibility to make the next step.
Yeah. I think Mel Robbins says, no one's coming to save you. You just got to figure
Love
it
it.
out. You just have
Yeah.
to do it.
Yeah.
So, Float, where do people go to find out more about you or contact you if they want to know more about, well, the business, entrepreneurship? Where do they find you and Float?
Yeah. If they want to be a float nurse, and so
Mhm.
we're throughout all of California right now, but we will be going to new states very soon.
Wow.
If they want to see if it's a good fit for them, go through the onboarding process. That starts at float.health. So
Okay.
there's no .com. It's just float.health. And there's a join us button that they can click on to go to start that. And if they have questions, like generally, I'm 100% open to talking through their problems and kind of sharing more of my experience with anybody. They can just
Okay.
reach me directly. I'm Ryan at float.health is my email. So
Okay. And so
send me an
everyone
email.
knows, I'll have all of this in the show notes, and we'll link directly to you. Ryan, thank you so much. This is so exciting. I'm excited for you. I'm excited to see
Oh,
where this
likewise
goes.
for you too. This is so fun. Never done this
I
before.
I'm loving it. I really appreciate your time. This has been really great.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it,
Yeah.
Erica.